Hello, this is the Social Identity, Stereotype, Prejudice, and Discrimination, Part 2. So we have learned about stereotype in the first part of the video, and now we will talk about prejudice and then discrimination. So if we talk about stereotype is basically the beliefs about certain groups. So prejudice is beyond just the belief, but it's the attitude, our feelings about a certain group, typically about the out-group. So prejudice is defined as negative attitude towards people from other group or the out-group. The basis of prejudice is, of course, group membership. There are some important points that we must know about prejudice. So first, children are not born with prejudice or stereotypes, so it's not something that's innate. It's something that's learned. Children learn to be prejudiced through association, reinforcement, imitation of family, peers, media, and the surrounding communities. And children as early as 3 to 4 years old already appear to have racial-related values. So basically, toddlers have already learned from us, from the media, from around them about race and racial-related values. So for example, that was happening in the 50s. White children did not like black children, toddlers. At that time, they already had a specific attitude about the out-group. So there are several sources of prejudice. First one could be threats to the self-esteem. When self-esteem is threatened, people are most likely to derogate the groups representing the threat. Indeed, doing so helps to boost or restore threatened self-esteem. Via this mechanism, groups can maintain their dominant position. So basically, why they are prejudiced to the other people, to maintain their own status quo, to maintain their own position in the society. So the threat to self-esteem would trigger people to derogate and sabotage of group that is the target of prejudice. So they would say something bad, something negative about the out group that is the target of prejudice. This would allow them to maintain their group position and their self-esteem will be restored. Another source of prejudice could be competition. It could be real competition. That's the basis of this. It's explained in the realistic conflict theory. So people are fighting for life sources, for example, for the economy, for the employment, for the land, for the food. When there are, for example, immigrants coming to a host country, for example, the local people might feel competition towards the immigrants because they might feel that the immigrants are taking their jobs, taking their lands, taking their food, taking their economy, etc. So then they feel negatively towards this group of immigrants. They feel they dislike, they might even hate the group of immigrants because of that, because there is real conflict between them. And of course, the other source of prejudice would be due to social categorization, the us versus them effect, the in-group favoritism and out-group derogation that we have already discussed in the previous video. This is a grouping based on explicit cues such as age, gender, race, or other social cues that leads to the stereotype, especially negative stereotypes. So the prejudice components include the cognitive, which is the beliefs, the stereotype itself, affective, the negative feelings, and it could also be expressed at the behavioral level, which is discrimination. And there's also something that's called the implicit prejudice. This happens when the cognitive component have been attempted to be removed, but the affective component is still there. So we try to remove the negative stereotypes about a certain group, but inside ourselves, we still feel bad or feel negative towards members of that certain group. Perhaps we don't even feel it, but we unknowingly or unconsciously, we just don't feel comfortable to be friends with them, for example, or to be close with them. But we say that no, I'm not prejudiced towards them. I don't have negative stereotypes towards them. They are as competent as us. But at the same time, I just don't feel comfortable being around them. So that's called the implicit prejudice. And sometimes we are really unaware about that it exists. Yeah, we might meet someone else or a certain types of tests to really know, to make us aware that we do still have some implicit prejudice towards a particular group of people. One way to identify implicit prejudice is using implicit association test, or IAT. You can basically browse, implicit association test, or IAT, in Google, and it will show you a website where you can take tests yourself, and you will also get the result directly afterwards. And there are many, there are various tests that you can take. So this is a test thought to measure unconscious or implicit prejudices according to the speed with which people can pair a target face, for example, black or white, old or young, Asian or white, with a positive or negative association, for example, the word honest or evil. So the fastest they are, when they see, the fastest we are when we are matching between the category and the emotional words, then it means that we have implicit prejudice if it's negative. So for example, when there is a white face comes up and there is a word honest, for example. So if we match the white face and honest, which is the positive emotion, very fast, it means that we don't really have implicit prejudice towards the white people. But if we, for example, have an Asian face and there is a word lazy, for example, and we match it quite fast, then it means that we might have implicit prejudice towards Asian people. And this test is really interesting. I think everyone should try it, because even though you already know that this is an implicit association test, sometimes we cannot avoid being implicit prejudice towards others. I have tried a few times, and I was shocked, surprised, with the result that I got myself. So you must try. So what are the impact of prejudice? So the first impact includes stereotype threat. This is whether or not you feel stereotype threat depends on what category you are identifying with at the time. So for example, there was research about this. The Asian women do worse on math tests when they see themselves as women, because women are stereotyped as poor at math, rather than as Asians, because the stereotype of Asians are that they are good at math. So in this study that Shi Pitinsky and Ambady conducted in the 90s, they told Asian women, a group of Asian women were told, to kind of like reminded themselves about their gender, that they were women, and the other group of Asian women were reminded that they were Asians. So, and then they gave these two groups of Asian women the same math test, and the Asian women who were reminded about their Asian identity scored significantly higher than the Asian women who were reminded about their gender before the test. So yeah, this is a very interesting study and very interesting result. Prejudice might also impact the target of prejudice's behaviors or even competence through the phenomenon that's called the self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is basically when our expectations becomes true, our expectations about someone else becomes true. So when we are, for example, when we expect that the person that we meet is smart, then we would have high expectation towards this person. We might also discuss about important stuff with this person, and that person, the person whom we have conversation with, even though this person is a stranger, this is the first time that the person meets us, he or she would feel good about themselves. So he or she would also show their competence. They would also act smart. So basically our expectation becomes true. So it's confirmed in their behavior that we expected that they were smart and they are really smart. So in a study that was conducted in the 70s, the researchers asked white undergraduate students to interview fake job applicants, for example. So these white interviewers interviewed either white applicants or Black or African American applicants. So the white interviewer treats the job applicants differently during the interview in the study number 1. So they sit far away and had short interview with the Black applicants. So the Black applicants at that time, they behaved, nervously, ineffective, and less competent because of the way that the interviewer treated them. While the other applicants were white, they were judged more poised, more effective, and more competent. And they did behave that way because of the way that the interviewer treated them, because they sit closer and has longer interview. In the study too, the researcher, asked white interviewers, Confederates, basically Confederates, so not real participants in the study, but they were trained. So they were trained white interviewers to use one of the 2 interviewing styles from the study number 1, where the white applicants were judged as performing more poorly when they received the style previously used for blacks than when they received the style previously used for whites. So when the other people see it from the videotape, because these interviews were videotaped, and then they asked some reviewers to review the behaviors of to rate the behaviors of the applicants. They saw that the applicants who sat, when the interviewer sat far away and had short interview with the applicant behaved, nervously, ineffective, and less competent. So they basically behaved in a way that was expected by the interviewer, even though they were white. But because the interviewer sat far away from them, so the applicant felt something negatively about themselves. So this is a laboratory settings. In reality, this happens a lot, and sometimes unconsciously. As what I have already mentioned before, sometimes we just ignore someone, or we just don't want to be friends with members of particular group without us knowing exactly what's the reason. But that might actually affect that the members of that particular group that we are trying to avoid. So be careful with our behavior. There are several strategies to minimize prejudice. The first one on learning not to hate. So this is cooperative interdependence, where people are trained to be more cooperative and have mutual understanding. Second one is establish contact. There is a theory called the contact hypothesis theory, which assume that prejudice will be reduced when the principles of similarity and equality are met, when we have more contact with the outgroup members. So if the more contact we have with the outgroup members, the less prejudice that we would have towards that outgroup members, as long as we consider each other as similar and equal with each other. And then there's another strategy that's called recategorization. So instead of categorizing us, versus them, categorizing in group as us and out group as them, we can categorize everyone as us. So we can use, a more superordinate identity. Like, for example, we have so many ethnicities or so many different groups in our country. So instead of saying, us and them, seeing the differences between us, we can say that we are all Indonesians. So discrimination happens when there is a different or special treatment towards others due to their membership in certain groups. So for example, ethnicity or gender. There are some open discriminations that happen in the modern world. So, for example, prohibition of entering the US for people from the terrorist-sending countries. In 2017, the US President-elect Donald Trump issued an executive order on travel bans for Muslim-majority countries such as Iraq, Syria, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. Even if related to 9/11, most of the perpetrators were actually from Saudi Arabia and some from Egypt, but they were not banned here. So only these countries, Iraq, Syria, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. Well, this policy is now no longer in force, but there are still many difficulties faced by immigrants in the process of documenting their immigration to the US, although the current administration already promised to be different from the previous one. And then another example of open discrimination is that women were actually prohibited from driving a car in Saudi Arabia. They were prohibited from driving cars for reasons related to stereotypes against women. For example, women cannot take care of themselves properly, and this is not good for a women's uterus, etc. There are some silly reasons as well. This policy, fortunately though, was already lifted in mid 2019 ago. So, but these two are examples of open discriminations that we experience, or at least we witness throughout our lives. In contrast to the open discrimination, there's also implicit discrimination. This might be expressed in the form of microaggression. So for example, by looking down and do not want to deal with a certain group of people, or praise unnecessarily. For example, oh, your English is perfect even though you're Asian, while in fact, since birth, this person lived in the US or in another English-speaking country, but indeed of Asian descent. So like, yeah, your English is so perfect. How come? Where did you learn English? Well, I was born in the US, for example. Another type of implicit discrimination, as I have already mentioned a couple of times earlier, is keeping distance. Many cases here occur in people with disabilities or disabled. So this is the end of the social identity, stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination course. I will see you again in other videos.